All right. Well, episode 11, nuts. I feel like, I don't know about you, Holly, but I feel like we just started this like yesterday. So
I know.
super pumped. Episode 11, Holly and I are going to talk about a bunch of different things. So Natalie or anyone, just feel free to like jump in if you have questions, or if you want to take it further in a specific direction. I would love to start, I think, on the topic of, hiring profiles for people on the growth team or for people that are coming up in the growth industry. Like, how do you get there? Like, what is the right path? Is there just one path? I think last week we talked with Julia about like what her path looked like into growth. And I think, Holly, everyone is dying to know, about your path. I'm everyone. And then just hearing like that story. And I think, I would love for us to kick off with that.
I can start, and I would love to hear your story, Karina. It's and Natalie as well. So I don't think there's any major in university necessarily that that says, oh, like you're studying the major of like growth. Yeah. And then I think majority of the people who work in growth don't even have a marketing degree or, business or economy degree necessarily. A lot of us stumbled into this just like at work and being at the right place at the right time. I, for one, was a Italian major in college, and then I studied literature in Italy, and like language. And I was a simultaneous translator between Chinese and Italian. Was a tour guide, taking a bus of Italian tourists to go to the Great Wall. So
love this.
Very fond memories. And then I figured I don't want to just repeat what other people say. I want to have my own voice. And that's why I wanted to go to grad school. I did a master's in European studies in Washington, D.C., of all places to study Europe. My justification was it's more neutral to study at a third continent. I don't know if that's true. Back then, still, our international study was still quite good. I had a great experience, but pretty soon I found I wanted to like work at international organizations, but I did an internship at the UN, and I realized it is a very long-term effort to change a lot of the social issues. I was doing research on healthcare policy in developing countries, and like all very rewarding work. But it is going to take 20 years, 30 years or longer to change policies significantly, especially in that context. And I am rewarded by work and input and output. So I want to see. I think a lot of the people in growth probably have that tendency, right? Like we want to know what we put in, what's the result, in a fast manner versus waiting for another year or two. And that's why fast iteration, experimentation, and trying things and innovate on things is a trait, I think, in a lot of people who work in growth. So I went into consulting initially because I didn't know what I wanted to do. Did strategy consulting for 3.5 years, and that really helped me to hone a lot of the critical thinking and foundational business knowledge. At the time, some projects were more interesting than others, but looking back, every project in its own way has been really informative in understanding a lot of the things. So after consulting, I went to a startup, and that's the first more of a startup-y work I was doing. So I first started to do affiliate marketing, because they needed someone to figure out how, like, their business model is affiliate model. So I was the one who's like contacting the different affiliates to get it work. And pretty soon I realized without a good product, we can try to make a deal, but the conversion is not going to be very high. There's not going to be the volume of traffic we need to make that business model work. And they didn't have a product manager at the time. So I went into product to take on the more product development, user research, and overseeing both product and marketing. And that was really scrappy in a way where, like, you have this initial, I was the first business hire, and my team is pretty small, and we worked on everything and tried a lot of things, and customer centric approach was in a very rudimental way, and like I didn't know how it was called, customer centric or whatever. I was like, let's just like talk to some users and hear what they really
build things for the customers. Yeah.
Sounds so straightforward. I think marketers are really good at creating like names.
Marketers, yeah.
It is actually very, very foundational things. So that's how I got into like product and marketing. And then, after that, like a Google and Slack, it was all came from there.
That's awesome. So how did you go from like startup world to Google?
At the time, I was living in New York for 7 years, and my next step is either to go to Westchester and get a house and a dog, or like, try something new. And San Francisco and Silicon Valley seems to be a really amazing place, especially if you work in tech. So the Google opportunity came about, and I wasn't planning to move, but figured I'll try it out for like maybe a year or two. And I ended up staying for 4 years, and really, really amazing experience, and worked on both B2B and B2C. I think the biggest learning from Google is how do you work on volume? Because every Google product is maybe at a small startup, it's okay to have like a 10,000 traffic or like 100,000. It's already very good. But at Google scale, if you stay at that like a 10 to 100,000, the project is going to get killed. Right. So like the idea from the very beginning is to how do we create a scalable business that can be millions and billions of revenue, and how do you design your products from early days? So that's naturally has this tension between let's try things out and build it really fast, and how do we reach Google scale? So I learned a lot about like how to operate in that dichotomy, and how to think about what we need now and what we need 6 months or 12 months from now.
Amazing. Okay. And then Google to Slack.
Slack was primarily, I worked in Google's like website strategy, worked on Google stores as the head of growth. And I learned like, initially I wasn't only focusing on growth, but as the project launched, what we needed was to basically get users, get revenue. And that was what we lacked. And that's how I got into really thinking through user acquisition, growing revenue, because it's e-commerce. It's almost like the same realm. There's no a clear say, oh, product is only like a product. Marketing works on acquisition, product works on retention, monetization. It's the same thing because your product is the website. And in there, working very closely with product and thinking through once we get people to visit the website, how do we convert them? How do we keep them? How do we keep them to come back? And that was really interesting. There's lots of experimentation, of course. For e-commerce, especially, there's quick feedback because like whether people purchase. And what's really interesting for Google Store was you have a pretty interesting mix of different types of products. You have a $600 Pixel phone, and you have a $35 Chromecast. And as an e-commerce business, how do you optimize? Well, first of all, what do you optimize? Do you optimize for revenue, for units sold, or for profit margin? Right? The mix or your marketing strategy and product strategy is different if you optimize for different goals. And we ended up optimizing for different goals at different stages, which is like really, really interesting, like problem to think about. And then for Slack, I really want to continue doing that. And the Slack opportunity came about, and I thought it's interesting to work at an earlier stage company. I love the building and figuring things out part. So the Slack opportunity was really attractive. And help them to build out a lot of the initial infrastructure and then team.
Amazing. Love it. It's so fun to hear about just like everyone's path, because it's never, I think, what everyone has placed in their mind of like, okay, if you want to be, head of growth one day, or if you want to have this path, like here are the steps. So I appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, especially people of my generation. I think very few of us were like, I want to work on growth. Mm-hmm. It's all like we're working on something else. And the typical profile I've seen is no typical profile. So there's engineers who was working on the website. And then they're like, oh, this is interesting to actually test out different landing pages. And then they got into more of the product management and then got into the growth type of product management. They ended up doing a lot of the experimentation and stuff. Another profile I see is analysts. So analysts do a lot of the data analysis on user behavior, on how user change over time, and cohort analysis. All of those are foundations of growth. And from the data, there's a lot of insights where you can test out. So analysts is a big source of growth folks. And then I think marketers who are not traditionally the PR comms type of profiles, but more the quantitative driven profiles, people who used to work in like ad agencies or user acquisition roles, SEO folks tend to be another big type of profiles.
Yeah, for sure.
How was your?
What's that?
How was your path?
Yeah, I feel similar in that it was like not planned at all. And when I was in school, so I went to school at UNLV, and I was an econ major, and like a lot of the path for econ majors there is like go work for one of the big casinos as an analyst. And there's just a lot of like floor data and things like that the casinos need. So that was really like, okay, I'm just going to do that and then like see what happens. And so it was like my senior year, I got an internship just randomly through a friend who was like, hey, like this sounds fun. They need an analyst. Like they're a startup. And I was like, I don't even really know what startup life means. Like, sure, I'll try it. And so, yeah, they were a startup. And I was doing data analyst stuff for them. Like their product was compiling like a lot of government data that was typically on paper. Like, how do we get that to be digital? And then how do we run some like analysis? And so I came in and just helped them like foundationally start that side of the product. And then of course, naturally startup world, it was like, so there's this thing called marketing. Like we should probably do this. Like who wants to take a stab at it? And I was like, I'll try it. And then was kind of like my first entrance into like advertising and just marketing as a whole. And I was like, I actually love this. Like it's a combination of both. Like I'm very introverted and extroverted. So it was that still like behind the computer, like quantitative data analysis, but also like the creative, like art side and like understanding people and almost like psychology with the marketing. So from there, I was there for a couple of years, and then I moved to Oregon and I went and worked for Yahoo as like an ad ops specialist. And so that was like heavy book of business, like running multiple, ad accounts and things like that with their Yahoo product. And then from there, I got an opportunity to work for a company that was like a trucking technology company. They had no website. Everything was like offline. They were extremely profitable. And their focus was to sell. They basically sold their product to like third-party channel distributors who then sold to the end users. And I was like, and all of their marketing efforts, sales efforts were directly through those channel partners. And I was like, well, why are we not doing any marketing to the end users? We have no website, we have no ads, we have nothing. Like everything was just like trade shows and like drop off some paper printers at like, some of the channel partner stores. And I'm like, just like you, Holly, like I love building. I'm like, let me have my hands on everything. I built the website from scratch and just like literally Frankensteined everything. And from there, we grew revenue like 25% year over year for 2 years in a row, just from like basically going online and just advertising to end users. And so from there, I was like, I love this. And I loved just the concept of like having very little to work with and being scrappy and builder. And then I went and worked for Lytics, which was a customer data platform. I joined there when I think I was like 7 months pregnant. And I was like, you know what, time for a change. Why not now? Joined Lytics, and one of my good friends now, Matt Cannell, was the one who hired me, and he was director of demand gen at the time. And I joined as digital marketing manager. And same thing. He was like, it's just me. I need help. All things like basically what is now performance. And so I helped them like start all of their ad accounts, SEO, like all of those efforts. And then he left me shortly after. And so they were like, do you know what demand gen is? And I was like, sure. And so ran that. And yeah, I mean, everything is basically like, and that's generally my advice to everyone is like, there's an opportunity, especially if you're like earlier on in your career, like say yes, jump on it and just kind of figure it out. And I'm just mostly like a self-teaching type of person, and that's how I learn best. So then, yeah. And then from there, it was kind of like learning all things demand gen, but it was great because I always had like this B2C background of like digital and performance that I could bring into more of like the enterprise demand gen side of the world. So it's been interesting to see this like almost cross section of demand gen and growth, where at some companies it feels like they want to blend those two things together. But yeah, I just think it's dependent on your product and your ACV and things like that. But yeah, and then from there, the company that I was at, that I helped just build like all marketing stuff, website, things like that. They're like, hey, you left. We kind of think we need a sales team now. And can you help us figure out like how to hire and who to hire for our marketing side? So I went there and did a stint and just helped them build their sales team and get that engine rolling. And that was like the demand gen side of the business, and then marketing. And then I met Eli at Mattermade, and I was like, you know what, this sounds amazing. Like, because I'm a builder, I really like to come in and like, tell me all the problems and like, let's figure out how we can approach everything. And yeah, I'm like forever learner. And yeah, I think for me, advice is just like, there isn't a path, but make your path.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from you and from a lot of other growth folks is like the curiosity and the desire and thirst for learning is a huge common trait for growth folks.
And I think being like not afraid of risk is a big thing too.
Yeah.
Because I think in growth, there is a lot of risk taking. Like, let's test this thing. Let's run this experiment that could completely not work. Hopefully it does. Hopefully we've done the legwork so that the percentage of it working is probably better. But yeah, I think not being afraid of risk is definitely a profile trait.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's like, if half of your experiments are successful, you're not taking enough risks. And it's so easy, especially for high achieving folks, driven people, seeing something didn't pan out as we thought it would, can be really hard. And it's easy to take that as a failure for ourselves. So it's really important to remember, oh, this is just like new information. That I know this hypothesis didn't work. It's not like I was wrong.
I am wrong. Yeah, for sure. I think that's a perfect segue into just like, there is predictability, but then there's also not. Like in growth, especially for earlier stage companies where there's not a lot of historical data, or maybe it's like a completely horizontal product. So their like industry stuff is kind of even hard to benchmark off of. I would love to hear, Holly, just like early stage company hasn't even entered the market yet from like any performance side or like paid media. Like would you say that like, here's a channel mix you start with? It's a template, take this and run with it. Or like, how do you approach it?
I would love to have a template.
Sign me up.
But I can just charge like $100,000 and it's like, okay, cool. Like we don't have to try to find someone to figure this out. And then here's a gold platter. Go do it. I think the difficulty is every business is so different. And the audience is very different. So how things work can like what worked for Slack may not work for another product-led growth company. What worked for a developer-focused company may not work for a company that markets to marketers or engineers, marketers or like product people. And then also the additional dimension is stage, ACV, and team composite. Like, sometimes your early employees can have an oversized impact on your channel. The first growth hire is typically a generalist. Which is typically what I would recommend. Someone with like five-ish years of experience, plus or minus, who are very scrappy, who probably worked at a company just like 2-3 years ahead of you, so that they've seen something that's a little bit more mature, but they're not too mature to rely on existing infrastructure or existing like institutional knowledge too heavily, and someone who can just like run multiple channels and figure out what works best. Yeah, so that's I typically look for that first generalist person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even in the same industries, I think I talk to a lot of people where they're like, well, we're in the same industry and it's a similar, like either direct or indirect competing product. Like they're killing it on X channel. Like, let's just go and spend $1 million and like be there where they are. And I think yes to like all the variables you said, and even in the same industry, like, or even same type of product, it really does come down to product a lot of the time, is like what's happening once you get people to the site, what's happening to people once they get into the product, right? Like it's not just channel is the only variable. And I think a lot of the times when you're not a growth marketer, people look at like advertising as like a plug and play tool. Like if we put so many dollars in, this is how much we'll get out invariably. So yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for growth, especially, the devil is really in the details. Everyone can say, "Oh, start with content marketing, start with SEO," right? Like, of course, like start with SEO and content, but that could mean a million different things. It could be a content on your blog. It could be content on like third-party websites, or it could be content on social media, and content has all kinds of different formats. Is it like infographics or videos or copy? And then even if we pick one of the dimensions, and let's say your blog, and like what kind of categories or themes, how you organize your different content themes, what kind of audience to target what theme, and then like that really comes down to the real like execution of it. Just giving the generic advice of for early stage, let's start with content marketing is like, okay, at least like don't put on ads as your first channel. It's helpful, but like the more helpful is actually analyzing what's the positioning and why do people care, what could be the potential messaging, and test out with various different content.
Yeah. I'd be interested to hear too, like, I feel like that positioning and identifying like, okay, where do we want to start, even from content marketing or SEO, is different. And I want to say easier when there's a horizontal product versus like a vertical product. Because I think your competitor landscape is smaller. Yeah. So any thoughts on that front?
Oh, I think this is a really interesting topic. A lot of the clients I work with are horizontal products. Because it could be very wide. Sometimes it can feel generic and say like, oh, we're for everyone who needs to communicate, or for everyone who wants to be productive.
Yeah.
And
for everyone that wants to do their job.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, especially productivity tools, right? And like collaboration tools, that's very easy. And like you look at the websites and it all become very similar, even though the actual product is very different.
Right.
So that's my qualms to productivity tools. Anyways, what was the topic?
Yeah, I think just like the strategy in terms of like identifying the right messaging or positioning for horizontal products versus vertical is just totally different. And I think they both have different issues. Like you're talking about horizontal products. I feel like that marketing team or the CEO or whoever it is gets really stuck on like, but if we get super specific, or if we like take the 3 highest and best use cases that we know based on whoever's in our existing database or just product usage, things like that, we're like eliminating the possibility of working with all of these other people who our product can be useful for, but not highest and best use. And so it's really hard to get the entire team on board of like, let's focus in on, this persona, or let's get really specific in our messaging. And that might, leave out this persona or the other, where like vertical, I think opposite spectrum, they get more stuck on like trying to align or misalign their positioning with competitors. Like it's very competitor driven, right? Like who are the top 3 competitors directly to, this product in this vertical. And I'm going to try to do the positioning that is basically like mismatching whatever they're saying or like differentiating ourselves from them. And I think they both just pigeonhole like, your positioning efforts.
Mm-hmm. This is real. So I am in the school of let's pick the top 3 and really win in the top 3. And then once we're known and we like own these markets, and let's expand from there. And there's already validation, and you already learned a lot of how things work, and it's much more scalable from there. But I know there's a lot of concerns about if we communicate to just 3 personas or like 3 use cases, and that could limit us. I wonder how widespread is that worry, and what's your opinion around that?
Yeah, I think it depends on the team. It depends on mostly, like the most flack that I ever hear from is typically like the sales side. Like, okay, but if we only have this messaging or these 3 frameworks for messaging, we're leaving out, or we're leaving these 3 type personas or use cases on the table. And so really, yeah, like everything just comes down to communication and buy-in and strategy at the top of like, here's where we're focusing, and focusing doesn't mean we're not going to talk to anybody else, but it means we're focusing here.
One potential strategy could be that I've seen some people do is use a different targeting strategy for marketing versus sales.
Yeah.
So for marketing, let's create landing pages for each of the personas, right? Like, yes, it's it takes some work, but creating 10 landing pages with all the possible personas is not that much of a work. And, you create vertical pages, you create vertical/industry pages, you create role-based pages, and you can create use case-based pages, and all of those like dimensions. You can already that helps with SEO. It helps with just different people finding different things. And for sales, however, because it is more labor intensive, they can focusing on a few verticals first, a few like dimensions first, and win in those is probably like a place to start at least.
Yeah, for sure. I want to pivot a little bit because I do want to talk about this. But total pivot, free trial to paid, and the nurture that happens around that. What have you seen that's like tried and true, or what are some of the best practices in terms of like, okay, we have this free trial funnel. What is marketing's contribution to getting those people from free trial to paid versus like customer success or the product team or even the sales team, right? Should that even be more of a marketing focus, or is that where the handoff really lies, to other departments?
I think from free to paid needs to be cross-functional. And different functions can own different things of different pieces of the puzzle. So for marketing, a lot of times it's thinking about what's the trigger for paid based on those triggers. Think about messaging. And think about when to message. And of course, like a product has a big role in it, like of figuring out those triggers and run experiments. But marketing can work on like user research, can work on like different comms plans, and even help with writing some of the copies. And then depending on product. If it's a self-serve free to paid, then CS is typically more of a as needed function. So there's a scaled CS where the problem is more inbound. It's like, oh, if someone has a problem, we solve it. We help them. And then there's like more enterprise focused, bespoke. CS is what I call it, is like that's when you have like a dedicated CS manager and like help you on board and more focused. And that's more of a like CS driven, sales driven, free to paid, and typically used in enterprise focused audiences and products.
Yeah.
What have you seen?
Yeah, I've seen similar. I've seen it be less focused on the marketing side, in terms of like, okay, you're responsible for any nurture program to get these free trials converted to paid. And that's a KPI that solely is for marketing to drive, because it's like, there are just so many other factors outside of marketing's control on that front. And then, yeah, the other thing I was going to float over is like, have you seen that from like an org structure or like even the growth org structure, would you have those be separate roles? Obviously stage is a determining factor depending on your headcount availability and things like that. But in the perfect world, would there be like a growth marketer just responsible for the acquisition side? And then from there, like maybe there is somebody who's more product oriented, because I feel like those are, depending on who you talk to today, like there are performance marketers / growth marketers that are really honing in on the acquisition side of like channel mix and that side of the business. And then there are more product focused, which I think tend to be those people that come up as engineers and things like that focus on more of the product growth marketing experimentation. So like free to paid.
I've seen marketing teams working on free to paid. You can even, of course, use advertising or content or like other strategies, email strategies to help free to paid process. So I don't think it's necessarily only of a product initiative. And they work on different aspects of it. So if it's more of a product change within products, then yes, I've seen the team. It's like typically a product manager, like trying to run like different plans, which involves like a core engineering change, and that's when typically a PM is involved.
Yeah. Does that get tricky from like an attribution side when you're saying like, yes, marketing should be involved from like content or even like just impression-based ads, stay in front, top of mind? Unless there's like a solid attribution model or like the tracking is properly set up, is it hard to attribute like those marketing efforts to the free to paid conversion?
Depends on how good your tracking is. Yeah. Of course. And then in general, I feel this needs to be a shared OKR. Of course, everyone is ultimately want more revenue. So free to paid, you want that to be on top of everyone's mind. But because typically people needs multiple touch points to pay anyways, your email communication, your high touch, your product experiments can all contribute to that, even though, on the last conversion basis, it could look very different. It's almost something that needs, from a senior executive perspective, marketing and product needs to align and say, this is really important. And even though sometimes it's hard to understand how much marketing has helped with this, we are going to continue to do this because this, it is important. But of course, there's other ways of testing this, right? Like if we send an email, for people who we send email and people who don't send email, is there any difference in the conversion rate? Or I remember LinkedIn or some other company always reserve, I think 1% or 10%, like a percentage of their users who's not exposed to any of their experiments. You can compare with the control group if any of our marketing efforts or product efforts actually make a difference.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's like a KPI thing, a shared OKR, the executive team saying a little bit to it doesn't have to be a complete exact science, but we know it's a lot with brand marketing too. This is important to the business and we know that this works. And then finding those ways that we can try to prove lift wherever we can is very similar to even super high ACV enterprise, demand gen, right? It's the same thing. A lot of the times you have CFOs that'll just nix marketing budgets because they're dollar in, dollar out, right? But it's you have an 18-month sales cycle. And it's not going to be, they're going to see one ad and buy this, $100,000 product, right? And then there's a buying committee. And so it's finding those ways to say engagement or impressions and things like that to build out the lift. But it feels like a similar vibe having been exposed to that side of the free to paid conversion. I feel marketers shy away from it because there is no direct attribution to on the acquisition side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that it comes down to how we think about our work. If we think about our work as I'm going to do the best for marketing, or from just marketing perspective, it can create certain silos. If we think from the company perspective, it's for the company, what is the best thing to do? And then that typically leads to a decision that is not locally optimized, but for the overall system.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think I want to save all of our other topics for the next coming weeks. This was awesome. Natalie, if you have anything, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, Holly, I appreciate you jumping on the spot and sharing kind of your growth path. And then next week we have Megan coming. So I'm super excited for that front. Episode 11. Thank you guys.
Thank you for joining.
Bye.
Bye.